Zelensky has been insisting for the last days that Russia is the one that fired an S-300 surface-to-air missile in Poland, right? So just a few kilometers from the border with Ukraine, and killed 2 poor men. And even though NATO came out and said, nope, it was not Russia. And then Biden came out and said, nope, it was not Russia. And then Poland came out and said, it was not Russia. He still insists, oh, it wasn't us. Again, Ukraine has S-300. And just given the radius, because you have to remember, S-300 missiles have a range of 150 kilometers. So just by drawing a radius around the blast site of 150 kilometers, there are no Russian forces in this entire area. So, and what were they firing at? The Ukrainian Air Force? What Ukrainian Air Force? Ukrainian cruise missiles? Which cruise missiles? So it makes absolutely no sense. And the fact that he cannot take responsibility for this, it happens. It's not his fault. Their weapons, they have something called a dud rate. Whether we're talking about grenades or we're talking about, cluster bombs, which are, one of the most evil things ever invented. Or we're talking about, S-300 missiles. They all have a failure rate, and the manufacturer tests the crap out of these things to establish a percentage. So, I'm just randomly giving you a number here, but for example, you could say this weapon has a 0.6% dud rate. The M16 is far higher than that, but that's jamming. So my point is that it's normal that missiles are errant and misfire. It doesn't excuse that they killed 2 men. But I'm just saying that this happens with every country, with every weapon. And I don't understand why he just can't say, okay, it was us. Why make such a big deal out of it? This is so stupid. So just imagine, this is my point now, just imagine you give this guy nukes. And he's been begging. You remember he came out and said, oh, we need to, we meaning, the guys, my patrons, the US and the UK and all the people giving me billions of dollars in weapons. We need to strike Russia before they strike us. And he meant nuclear strike. And then, it was he sounded so batshit crazy. His spokesperson had to come out and walk it back and say, oh, no. Hey, he wasn't talking about nuclear weapons. He was talking about, those sanctions, like as if they had not sanctioned Russia into oblivion already. So I don't know, man. I'm sure he's under a lot of stress. I would not want to be in his shoes, but I also don't condone this reckless crap. Oh yeah, let's nuke Russia. Just plunge the planet into a nuclear winter. Oh yeah, you guys should maybe. I don't think he said this. I don't think Zelensky said activate Article 4, but he was kind of getting at it because Poland could say, we feel threatened as a NATO country and we want your help. And, you have to remember something. Wars have started over far less. It's a fucking miracle that no nukes have been used until now. I'm not kidding, man. And I pray to God that this never happens. I pray to God they need to quit this crap, both sides, and sit at a fucking table like adults and work it out. Look, man, even the Germans, with all their military might, what happened in the end? They had to sit down. Well, this is World War I, in that train carriage and sign a fucking armistice. And, these are the worst wars in human history, World War I, World War II, and the Cold War, right? So, even after the bloodiest wars, you have to sit down and talk. You have to do diplomacy. So why don't we avoid killing each other? Why don't we avoid nuclear catastrophe and just get to the diplomacy part? Because we have to get there anyway. These countries that are sending weapons to Ukraine, I understand, yes, giving weapons is considered, aid and defense, but not this much, man. Not with Russia. You don't. This is not a game. Okay, these are not toys. One little mistake, one wrong turn, one idiot, and you could just destroy the whole planet. There are many times during the Cold War where the United States and the Russians almost nuked one another because they thought there were nuclear missiles incoming. There's an infamous example. There was a Russian radar analyst who was sitting at his desk, and he's staring at it, and he sees what he thinks are nuclear missiles. Because you have to remember, with technology, radar technology, satellite technology, you can determine what kind of ordnance is being used based on the heat signature, the velocity, and other factors. Okay? If you fire intercontinental ballistic missile, that it's going to go into space and then fall back down, and it's going to come at a specific rate, but in a range of speed. It's going to have a certain amount of there's going to be a specific temperature range from the boosters and so on. So they have ways of telling, right? Very sophisticated, even since the Cold War, especially since the Cold War. And this guy's sitting there, and he thought the Americans had fired nuclear missiles at Russia. And when that happens, God forbid, you have to act immediately. And thank God he did not, and his superiors did not fire nuclear missiles in response, because there were no nukes coming. It was just a malfunction, and I want to say human error, but actually it's the opposite. That guy used his brains. There was no error, on the contrary. And this is just one example of many. So this is a very, very, very delicate situation. And Biden himself, you don't have to take my word for it, Biden himself, the US president, is coming and saying this is the closest we've been to nuclear war since 1962. If I accept that, that's probably one of the only things I agree with, agree on with Biden. Okay, so why are you making this worse? I'm not saying you have to like Russia or accept what Russia's doing, but there must be an alternative for everybody's sake, because this is too important. You can already see the effect that this is having on the rest of the planet in terms of grain supply, fertilizer supply, the price of oil. The whole world is in shock. And I know that, we've studied here on this channel, I've made the case to you that this is actually good for the global south, because it's plunged, or should we say it's accelerated the process of separation from the West and the rise of the East. And that has very good, angles to it, fine. But not at the cost of nuclear war. I don't think anyone in China or Iran or the BRICS countries would come and say, yes, it's good that we are progressing and becoming powerful at the cost of nuclear war. No. Better they go and rise slowly than to have something done so fast and maybe on the side there's a nuclear confrontation because there's no stability. This is inadmissible. It's inadmissible and incorrigible. And I know this sounds maybe a bit alarmist. I don't think it's alarmist. I think this is extraordinarily and extremely and acutely rational. It's actually the only rational thing anyone should be saying right now, which is we have to de-escalate. This is not a game. This is not a joke. The Russians themselves, Putin has not threatened to use nukes, but to use them in response, which is completely different and normal. Any country would do that. And this already indicates we are not in a good place right now. Okay, and never mind what's happening to the Ukrainians. At the end of the day, even though NATO provoked this and NATO backed the Russians into a corner, the Ukrainians are the primary victims. But like I said, this is something that has global ramifications. It is not a joke. And I want to just clear something up. If you took out the Russian leadership in the twinkle of an eye, right? You sent a nuclear missile aimed at the Kremlin. You sent 50 nuclear missiles, and you took out Putin, and you took out his defense minister Shoigu, and his generals, and every single officer in the Russian army, and every politician. You would still end the world, because the Russians have something called the dead hand. It's a system in place that can detect incoming nuclear missiles and confirm that they have landed on Russian territory, and then automatically fire nuclear missiles in response if there's a leadership decapitation, as it's called. You get rid of the president, the generals. Even then, they can still fire nuclear missiles in response, and they will fire fucking all of them. They will wipe out 10 US cities in half an hour. No one wants that. No one wants that. And there are nuclear submarines. The Russians, like the Americans and the British, have nuclear submarines. This means that they are not only powered by a nuclear reactor, which is what they're trying to give the Australians now to provoke China, but they are also nuclear armed. Okay, so Australia is not getting nuclear armed, just nuclear powered. But the Americans, the British, the French, the Russians have nuclear armed and powered submarines. That means these are submarines that are just in the oceans, down in the deep blue. They're scouring the earth. No one knows where they are. This is extraordinarily and extremely highly classified. It's the whole point that no one knows where they are. And these submarines have permission, whether they're Russian or they're American, doesn't matter. They are designed to be sort of a tripwire, sort of not a tripwire, excuse me, sort of a fail-safe switch. So in the same case, if you take out the leadership in Washington or in Westminster, in Whitehall, number 10, and you take out the leadership in Moscow, those submarines will find out, and they have permission to launch nuclear missiles immediately. And they carry several of them. So there is no low-yield nuclear missile. You know, if you think that you can drop a low-yield bomb on Russia and they're just going to shut up, I mean, you should, like, just be quiet. Like, shut the fuck up. Don't talk about politics. Seriously, shut the hell up. The whole goddamn Cold War was defined by, oh my God, we are going to kill each other. The whole planet is going to be destroyed because, everybody has nukes now and they're pointed at each other. And you're coming in here and acting like that, Ukraine is happening in a vacuum and none of this matters. The nukes are still there. They got rid of a few of them, but the majority are still there. And the Russians have the best ones, right? So if you think they're just going to accept a nuke, you are out of your goddamn mind. The Americans wouldn't accept it either, and they shouldn't. No one should be using these things. Just as a side note, the UN voted, the General Assembly, just 2 weeks ago, they voted that to have Israel remove its nuclear arsenal. They have last I checked, about 9,100 nuclear missiles. Trust me, having one is already bad enough. And the UN, so the overwhelming majority of the GA, the General Assembly, voted to have Israel disarm and to have the IAEA, so that's the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the UN body that have the nuclear inspectors and the Non-Proliferation Treaty, to go in and basically sweep through their sites. Because remember, the Israelis have refused to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and they've refused to sign the ban on chemical weapons. So they have nukes. They use white phosphorus, which are banned. And the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the whole idea behind this is it speaks to what I was just talking about, which is nukes are dangerous. We should try to limit them as much as possible and avoid having countries disseminate them to other countries. This is why South Africa, for example, abandoned their nuclear weapon or their armed nuclear ambitions. Ukraine had nuclear weapons at the end of the Cold War. Remember, it was part of the Soviet Union, an integral part, and they built a lot of those high-grade weapons. Some of them nuclear, some not, and they had all these abandoned weapons sitting there, and they did the responsible and the courageous thing of giving them up. Now, there are people who are saying we should have never done that in Ukraine. That was a mistake. We should have kept the nukes because that way the Russians won't fuck with us. I can understand why you'd say that, yes. But I'm just trying to tell you that there are examples in history of countries actually being responsible. The Ukrainians deserve a tremendous amount of respect for that. And it's good that, South Africa did the same. But the big dogs, China, Russia, the US, these countries are not going to give them up. And it is therefore vital that, we don't back either of them into a corner, because when you do that, people, they make reckless decisions and it's going to be catastrophic.